Welcome to Natural Recovery from Suffering. This is Scott Killaby. Sam lived with a deficiency. He didn't love himself. He was a therapist. Many therapists have emotional repression and trauma and are driven to it just like teachers because they're suffering. But Sam, because he got on a particular topic, he got really popular very quickly. And the topic that he grabbed onto was narcissism. Now, it wasn't by chance that he grabbed onto this topic. He had just left a relationship with a woman that he, in the end, discovered was a narcissist. You could say of the grandiose kind. He went the whole relationship so desperately in love with her. And, well, I must tell you that Sam is an anger repressor. So he was drawn to her because she had this big energy and a commanding presence. She was confident. He was so drawn to it. It's the very thing that he doesn't have. Anger repressors often can't feel confident or feel good about who they are. So if they see somebody who looks that way, it can be an attraction. In fact, Sam was always attracted to those kinds of women. But he just left a relationship in which, well, when he got into the relationship, he thought this was the one. Because she had all those qualities, but he learned that she couldn't be vulnerable. Well, she was a hurt and sadness repressor, but he never learned that. Even though he's a therapist, it doesn't mean he's conscious of what drives people or what drives him. He just kind of stays at the surface like everyone else and labels people. So by the end of the relationship, he had labeled her a narcissist. He thought he made this incredible discovery about his relationship, and then he left the relationship. And when he did, he started talking about narcissism and helping other people leave their relationships. Millions of followers came. People who were traumatized, people who were in relationships with difficult people, maybe call them narcissists, maybe not, or had been in relationships with such people and were hurting because of it. Many of them felt like Sam felt, and he connected with his audience by saying, don't you also feel deficient? Because the narcissists like to play on that. You have to be careful, he says. And what Sam doesn't ever say is actually more telling, but his audience never notices it because he doesn't ever say it. He doesn't ever say, let me show you how to process that sense that you're deficient. You know, that thing within you that makes you drawn to so-called narcissists? He never says, I can help you with that, because he doesn't know how. He's never dealt with that within himself. So as a therapist, he just has other things that he does with people. Like, I can't get to the root of suffering, but I can tell you how to leave the person that's creating it, which isn't you. You're not a narcissist. I mean, people love to hear that, you know? Don't we all want to hear that? That it's not me in the relationship, it's my partner. And my partner's a narcissist and I'm leaving because I discovered it. And the problem with that ultimately is that it hooks anger repressors into an identity. And in fact, we're often coming from that identity, and so is Sam, which is that he's good, empathetic, peaceful, the opposite of the buried anger. That's his identification. And so because he shows up like that, and many anger repressors do, we tend to pick people who are opposite of us, who show up differently. And by the way, they often don't have visible empathy. And it's that fact alone which confused Sam with regard to Barbara, the relationship that he just left, because he knew from the beginning that Barbara couldn't show empathy, but he never knew whether she actually had empathy or not, because he never did work on himself deep enough to go beyond his identification as an empathetic person and therapist to see who he really is and then to discover who she really is. That never happened. It was just safer with Sam's buried anger to label her narcissist because she couldn't show empathy. And, being in his head, he went into the diagnostic manual and said, well, she doesn't show empathy, so it could be something to do with narcissism. And that's all. That's the depth of Sam's understanding of himself and the woman that he left. But now he has many, many people listening who are also anger repressors in relationship with sadness hurt repressors, like Barbara, and who are listening to Sam and learning that they too might be in a relationship with a narcissist. And again, Sam never says, let me help you look at the deficiency. Let me help you with the sense that there's something wrong with you that makes you drawn to those people. He just keeps pointing to those people. Sam hooks his audience in with identifications like, we're codependent, me and you. That's why I'm your person. That's why you come to me, because I'm like you. But what he never says is, I'm like you in that we all bury anger, or many of us. Maybe not his whole audience is full of anger repressors, but let's say 80-90% of his audience is, because he drew them there from his own buried anger and codependent talk. And so he keeps everybody safe unknowingly through these identifications. Because you're a codependent, you feel deficient. Do you feel that? And then people go, yeah, I feel that. And when you look at your partner, do you see how they don't show the empathy that you show? And they say, yeah, I see that. Well, do you see how you're vulnerable with your partner, but your partner can't be vulnerable with you in the same way? And the audience goes, yeah, I can see that too. And he says, well, your partner's a narcissist. And they go, yeah, they are. And then the suffering is solidified with that final conclusion. Because what's really happening, and if Sam would have been more earnest, he would have said, can I take you into your body and see how many of you have buried anger since childhood? And they probably wouldn't have said, yeah, but that would have been more earnest and helpful. Now let's say they went into the body and they discovered that many of them had buried anger. Then he could have said, let me show you how in your experience, when you have buried anger, that you identify with false stuff. That repression creates duality. So you're sitting there believing that you're something good, peaceful, empathetic, so that you can stay disconnected from your body and your buried anger and the people that you love, including your partner. He didn't tell him that, see? So he never pointed to the transformation that they could have in order to set boundaries and be their authentic self and have visibility on those relationships and either stay or go from that authenticity. But instead, he helped disable, or you could say he enabled them to stay in anger repression by never pointing out that the buried anger produces a lot of that codependency. And I'm not saying that all codependents bury anger, but I'm saying his audience drew a lot of codependents who bury anger, and there are a lot. It's just not all. But because he never helped them with the identities that he helped them believe in, like codependent and the very stuff at the surface, then they could never get to the buried anger, and many of them never experienced any real transformation. Some of them left their relationship once they discovered that the person was a so-called narcissist, but that's not transformation. That could easily just be a trauma response that Sam was helping people follow through on. And sometimes we need to leave relationships. There are always those examples, but when you really believe that the other people in your life are the source of your suffering, that actually is narcissistic. And so Sam was teaching narcissism to people who were trying to leave relationships with so-called narcissists. He was teaching them to stay in repression. And what that means is, remember, see, first, the people that Sam was targeting, often they were just hurt and sadness repressors. They had empathy. including Barbara, but they had to bury it. In order to survive, just like they'd have to bury vulnerable emotions, they had to bury that part of themselves. And so they couldn't show empathy. They can't show empathy in the same way that a codependent anger repressor can, because they identify with it. And so, first of all, a lot of people get mislabeled, and Sam is helping people mislabel hurt and sadness repressors as narcissists because he doesn't understand repression. And then what's equally unhealthy is that he's pointing his audience away from, you could say, their own narcissism, because we all have it. Yes, there's narcissism in people who repress hurt and sadness because they're manipulating. In other words, they're unconsciously bearing emotions and identifying with something at the surface to stay safe and get love from people, and then essentially manipulate people into believing things that aren't true because they believe them, and they have to have a supply of people to continue buying into that. But the same thing is happening on the anger repression side. Exactly. So, for example, Sam in his relationship was holding anger back and then identifying with false stuff, staying safe in the buried anger, getting love and approval from this woman, and continues to be attracted to those women, needs a supply to buy into this identification that he has around being empathetic and being the healthy one and all this stuff. He keeps perpetuating duality from his own repression. And that's what anger repressors do. So if we're going to talk about narcissism, I think it's only fair to say, well, it's in all of us. We are holding ourselves back. We are identifying with stuff that's false. We want everybody around us to buy into it. It's actually threatening if they don't. So there's a force behind it, a powerful force to get people to buy into things that aren't true, things that we believe to keep us safe and get us love and approval. Everybody's doing it. So my point here is Sam doesn't really have any ground to stand on. Worse than that, he's misleading his entire audience away from their own repression and narcissism, where the healing and the real freedom is, into this state of division, of shadows, of buying into the idea that these hurt and sadness repressors are narcissists. When in fact there might be people who rise to the level of being a diagnosable narcissist or NPD, but that's not these people. The majority of people that are listening to Sam are simply anger repressors who were drawn to hurt and sadness repressors because that's a shadow. And then it's like the anger repressor chooses that person and then unconsciously targets that person as the problem. It happens all the time. You don't have to call your partner a narcissist. It happens in subtle ways from anger repression. It's like if your partner is a sadness and hurt repressor and they can get angry, maybe their anger becomes the issue. It's not the same as labeling them as a narcissist, but it's a great distraction from your own buried anger. Maybe you wish your partner was, maybe don't say, well, you're not a narcissist, but you could be more empathetic. Can they? They can't. You see, that's unconsciousness to say that. Somebody who buries empathy cannot express empathy until it's safe. It doesn't make them a narcissist, and it certainly doesn't make them into a bad person or anything. It doesn't mean anything. So to say to somebody, can't you be, what I would say to an anger repressor is, can't you be angry? Fair is fair. The reason that I'm talking this way is because Sam was an anger repressor like me, and he just couldn't see it. All the unconsciousness that was there, and helping so many people who had the same repression as I had, who were also anger repressors, and I was pointing them away from their buried anger. And that's how duality actually continues, is pointing away from the very thing that creates it. The identifications of good and bad and empathetic or not empathetic or whatever. So when Sam came to work with me in mentorship, he wasn't even focused on any of this. he was focused on, like me, chronic back pain and other health conditions, which he had researched after watching me, and he realized that these conditions are probably coming from buried anger. And he did our test and he found the buried anger. But he was just like me in the sense that he just don't want to own stuff. Well, he was telling me a story. He was saying, one of the things that I say on YouTube is that when you do the research, you find that it doesn't matter what type of narcissist it is, because he got on that rant about narcissism. He said, it doesn't matter what it is. What they all have in common is an inability to be self-reflective, Scott. I said, you know what? I agree with you, Sam. Because all those years when I was teaching, there was an inability or unwillingness to look to see if I was being driven by childhood emotions, buried. There was an unwillingness there. So I agree that that's narcissistic in the sense that that's where that narcissistic conditioning is hidden. So if I'm going to refuse to look there, it must be that I'm benefiting from that and very avoidant. I get that, Sam. But I said, that's just, it's like a cop-out in a way if you look at it, because you're not being self-reflective about the buried anger, at least until you got here. He said, but I'm here. I said, I know, but you're here for the chronic pain. Just like I was. You didn't really want to face a lot of this stuff, and I didn't. Or you don't, and I didn't. And you're telling me to focus on that chronic pain. He said, well, I saw that you healed yours. I said, yeah, but you didn't listen to the other part of the message, that I found the narcissism within me coming from buried anger, and that my codependency and trying to help people, including people I was with, and this empathy identification is all trauma. So I can't help you, Sam, with that chronic pain unless you're open to seeing there are other things going on. He said, I'm open. I said, okay, but you might have to go make a statement to your followers after this is over. And it won't be the most comfortable thing you can imagine, but you'll be in a different consciousness at that time, and you'll want to do it. He said, I'm all in. But every day when he came back to work with me in the beginning, he was focusing on his chronic pain. And I said, I get it. And the work works. It helps you with that. But I said, one of the reasons that the relief from the chronic pain isn't happening at the level that you would want it to is because you're not looking at what you say when you go on YouTube to people. And you're not looking at who you're attracted to. So even though you tell your audience that there are these narcissists out there, you're telling me that you're still attracted to these women. And so what I would do, Sam, is I wouldn't even focus for a week on chronic pain if I were you. I would, like, when you go into the dating app and when you see that woman that you're really attracted to, do this work and see how your buried anger is making you attracted to that woman, because you told me yourself that every woman that you're attracted to ends up being a narcissist. So there must be something in you that's doing that. What if it's the same buried anger that's creating the chronic pain? And he discovered that it was. And he brought inquiry to that dating app. And he started to be interested in other kinds of women because he was discovering who he is. He's not who he thought he was. He's not the empathetic therapist, good person who's helping everybody. See, the narcissist, he is one. But that means we all are. He saw it in himself, that he was creating all of his own suffering to stay safe and get love from people, including the suffering as a helper on YouTube, creating suffering from repression and teaching it. And his whole life changed, just like mine. And he went back on YouTube and he made a statement to his followers. Do your own work. Shadows come from emotional repression. Yes, the people that you've been with may have had narcissistic tendencies. It's true. We all do. But look at those tendencies within yourself. Maybe narcissism shows up in you differently than it does the people you've been with. Maybe the people that you were with, they buried hurt and sadness when they were kids. And absent some psychopathy, they're actually just hurt. And when they show up a certain way at the surface that doesn't look empathetic, it's actually just repression. And maybe it isn't real narcissism. And maybe if you look within yourself, you're doing the same thing. You're bearing anger. And you're identifying with stuff that's false. You're doing what the hurt or sadness repressor is doing. You're showing up false in the relationships, the people that are close to you. You're manipulating. Just like I was, he said to his audience. Maybe all of this has been manipulation by repression, he said. Maybe my whole presentation on YouTube, no, it was all just a manipulation. Because that's the only thing we can do when we have emotional repression is manipulate ourselves and each other into denying that we're creating our own suffering. And one of the ways we do it is by looking outside ourselves at the big bad wolves out there or the big narcissist, because we're afraid to look at the big bad wolf within us or the narcissist. And he finished up by saying, I apologize, but the way that I'm going to make it right to you is not by sitting here and apologizing every day. I'm going to come onto YouTube and I'm going to invite you to do your work every day as my amends to you. And that's what he did. Every day he came on YouTube to remind people to do their own work. And when it looks like it's their partner who's the source of it, go to the buried emotions and see if you're creating your suffering again. And then you'll have visibility on your relationship on whether you want to stay or go. When you discover what you are, that's the power that you need. That's all you need. And with that empowering message and empowering life, Sam didn't suffer anymore. And many of the people that followed him stopped suffering. Now, even though this is a fictitious story, it's certainly drawn from elements in the world. Part of it from my story of being like the non-dual teacher version of Sam. And so although my shadow stuff wasn't sort of so overt like Sam, where he's literally calling people narcissists as if he doesn't have that, non-duality, when you have anger repression, is its own kind of shadow, because it's almost completely buried. But the way it showed up for me was, just like Sam, I buried anger. So on that end of the spectrum, there's identity. Good, peaceful, empathetic. On the other end of this energetic spectrum is the hurt and sadness repression, or the vulnerable emotion repression. And they have their own identities there. Well, what I learned through non-dual realization is that the identities can basically go away, but the energy of repression still drives everything. Because that's actually the driver. The stories are not it. So when the identities and stories go away in a non-dual realization, if it hasn't been embodied, you still have suffering in some way. And you still bring suffering to the world in some way because of not seeing this massive duality that's still in us. I was doing the same thing as Sam, but I wasn't just making people see enemies out in the world like that. But in a similar way, I was pointing people away from their buried emotions. I was just doing it with pointers to presence. Sam was doing it with therapist type talk. It's the same thing. Distraction is distraction. Repression doesn't care how we do it. It's all about safety and getting love and approval. And that's actually what makes it narcissistic. If we will all own the narcissistic conditioning, aka the conditioning that says, I have to hold anger or hurt, sadness back and be something false to get love and approval, the whole conversation will end. Because the conversation that's happening out there in social media mostly just has to do with buried emotions that people haven't processed yet. Thank you for listening. I put some links in the description in case you want to come and talk to me. I'm doing these talks, these free talks for like 20 minutes with people to get to know them better and to give them a sense of, what is here for you and where to go. Thank you for listening.